You want to know who Fred Krueger was? He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood. Kids we all knew.
What did you do, Mother?
A bunch of us parents tracked him down after they let him out. We found him in an old abandoned boiler room where he used to take his kids. We took gasoline. We poured it all around the place and made a trail of it out the door. Then lit the whole thing up and watched it burn. But he can't get you now. He's dead, honey, because Mommy killed him.
Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children's unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. The idea of children being punished for the actions of their parents, more commonly referred to as the sins of the father, ancestral sin, is found deep within the Bible, taking various forms among the denominations of Christianity. There is, of course, original sin, the idea that Adam and Eve disobeying the instructions of God and eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the first sin, is inherited to all people, even now, and must be absolved through acts of baptism. Can you imagine the anxiety? Even if you're a non-believer or you follow a theology that doesn't subscribe to ancestral sin, I think all of us have had a moment or two where we've wondered just what our parents were up to in that nebulous, hazy period of time we call before I was born, plus a few years I can't remember. If your parents have ever done genuinely bad things, they're not likely to tell you. Maybe when you're an adult and can understand such things, but if they feel they can get away with not telling you about that time they drove drunk and caused a horrible accident, or that time they were getting high with friends and accidentally burned a house down, they probably won't tell you at all. You may never know, unless the consequences of those actions begin to impact your own life. Of course, generationally speaking, culturally speaking, politically speaking, we're having a sins of our fathers moment right now, framed primarily as the destructive policies of baby boomer politicians versus the incoming millennial and Generation Z, having to deal with the oft-fatal consequences of such policies. What's going to kill us first? Our perpetual war machine or our complete disregard towards climate change? The older generation doesn't care. They'll be dead before facing the consequences of their actions. It's Old Testament retribution, affecting generations beyond the original sinner. In Wes Craven's 1984 horror film, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the fear comes from many places. Fear of nightmares, fears of the unknown, fears of predatory men. But the actual genesis point for the plot, the event that kicks off all the horror, is ancestral sin, the sins of the father, the previous generation doing something bad, and the children paying for it. In this case, the parents of Elm Street tracked down and killed Freddy Krueger, a child killer who got off because of an improperly signed warrant. The parents cornered Krueger and set him on fire, burning him to death. But Krueger doesn't stay dead, returning as a vengeful spirit that kills you in your dreams. And instead of targeting the people who killed him, he goes for their children, those who don't know of their parents' actions. The film is as much a mystery story as it is a horror story, with Krueger's victims trying to figure out who he is and why he's targeting them, the clues being hidden by the parents themselves. Comparing Krueger to his slasher film neighbors, Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees kill more or less whoever just happens to wander within arm's reach, but thematically they act as a form of punishment against the sins those young people are currently performing, most famously drugs, underage drinking, and premarital sex. In the first Friday the 13th, Pamela Voorhees, Jason Voorhees' mother, enacts revenge against a group of young camp counselors for the crimes of a different group of young camp counselors but the only direct connection between the two are in her deranged mind. A Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one at least, doesn't really play in that moralizing center that defined the 80s slasher genre. Drugs are nowhere to be seen. The only person to get into the alcohol is Nancy's mother. Tina has premarital sex, but with a bit of clumsy reluctance. Compared to most slasher films, the victims on Elm Street are remarkably normal. Well, maybe not Rod, he looks like he fell off the back of the truck shipping extras to Greece, but in the morality common of the slasher genre, they're almost pious. As a villain, Freddy Krueger taps into a lot of contemporary fears of child predators and serial killers, and failures of the criminal justice system. But his methods of supernatural revenge could be described as biblical, ancestral sin written in blood on the walls, or the ceiling in a few cases. In fact, the film evokes a decent amount of Christian imagery in relation to Freddy Krueger himself. The famous children's rhyme goes, "5, 6, grab your crucifix." And indeed, there are multiple crucifixes throughout the film. With their presence, your mind may wander to vampires, the supernatural creatures that crucifixes are often used against. Another use of crucifixes in horror are with exorcism stories, and A Nightmare on Elm Street actually copies a few beats and visuals from The Exorcist itself, most notably a section where scientists uncomfortably poke and prod at a young girl to try and determine a scientific explanation towards a supernatural influence, with nothing real to show for it. The United States has the largest Christian population in the world, nearly 240 million, just shy of 3/4 of the country's citizens. As such, movies made in the United States tend to default to a Christian perspective. Stories that involve the supernatural, ghosts, demons, vampires, hauntings, and exorcisms, these elements are usually made to function within a Christian worldview, with faith in Christ often being a tool to be used against the forces of evil. Wes Craven himself was raised in a very strict Baptist family and graduated from Wheaton College, an evangelical Protestant liberal arts college, the same college Billy Graham graduated from. And while Craven was pretty mum about his faith into his Hollywood career, this was the background that informed the writing of Nightmare on Elm Street, in an industry and genre that already embraces Christian signifiers. A completely Christian reading of A Nightmare on Elm Street is perhaps beyond all creative intention, but not actually that hard to do. Krueger's realm of steel and fire is as good a representation of hell as any. In the very first dream sequence, Tina is met by a white lamb going towards a tunnel of light, which Tina runs away from, into the arms of Krueger. Krueger tries to come in through a wall over Nancy's bed, but Nancy is presently holding a crucifix, and Krueger leaves. Nancy reattaches the crucifix to the wall, as if to ward any trespassers. And of course, this little bit of dialogue.
Please, God.
This is God.
The symbology tapers off as the film goes on. The crucifix warding Krueger is just one way to read that scene, and not a hard rule against him like it is against vampires or certain demons. But the idea has already been seeded, as the story continues with its ancestral sin narrative. Not that it's the only influence, or even the main influence on the story, but when we as a society treat Christianity as the default, Christianity gets into everything. Ancestral sin is, I believe, beyond the Bible, beyond theology. The fear of paying for the crimes of another has probably been around since the human race first conceived of the idea of punishment and justice. Freddy Krueger doesn't just feel Old Testament, he feels prehistoric. I know this is a short video. A Nightmare on Elm Street is one of those horror classics that have been picked over to death, and even what I say here isn't exactly a new observation, but it speaks to how odd and fascinating Krueger was as a slasher killer. With Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, the kills don't feel personal, it's just their nature. Even with more talkative, demonic, supernatural-like Krueger bad guys like Pinhead, it doesn't feel personal, it's just how we do business. Freddy Krueger? He's a jealous and vengeful god, and you'll never know exactly why he's killing you. And he loves it. Alternative thesis, A Nightmare on Elm Street is secretly the origin story of Claire from Bon Appetit.